Rabbi Martin Levy has served as the spiritual leader of Santa Fe's congregation in Bet Tikva, which is a Reform synagogue, since 2010. He was raised in Teaneck, New Jersey, and after graduating from Amherst College, he attended the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York and Jerusalem, and he graduated with honors. Rabbi Levy has served congregations in St. Louis, Texas, and Idaho, and has taught philosophy and world religions at Kingwood College and the University of Houston. Throughout his rabbinical career, Rabbi Levy has been actively involved in creative writing, near and dear to my heart. And his essays and articles have appeared in Midstream, the New York Times, the American Rabbi, and Response magazine, as well as in 2 full-length anthologies. He's also known as the Skating Rabbi. This is a comment made by a spectator at the 2015 U.S. Adult Figure Skating Championships in Salt Lake City, where Rabbi Levy and his ice dancing partner, Marie Whitmore-Strokoff, took home a gold medal in their ice dancing event for skaters ages 50 and over after just 2 weeks of practice together. So this is a fascinating man. We are blessed to have him here sharing his message on faith. Please welcome Rabbi Martin Levy.
I think I'm on. Welcome, Bochem V'Shalom, which means we come here in peace. And it's a delight to be with you. A couple of years ago, I was speaking in December around Hanukkah time, so Reverend Brendan asked me to talk about the holiday of Hanukkah. This morning, she gave me a very big task. So I'm going to try and distill many thoughts in the course of maybe 15 minutes. My professor used to say, if you can't do it in 12 to 15 minutes, you don't know what you're talking about. Beginning with a story which happened to me and probably happens to most ministers throughout their careers. I was serving a congregation in West Texas, in Amarillo, some years back. We were the only Jewish congregation for 130 or 40 miles around. So therefore, all these various church Sunday schools would bring their children to visit us and find out what the temple was like, what the symbols are in our sanctuary, a little about Judaism and so forth. One particular late January, a group from the Methodist Church came to visit, and it happened to be the Torah portion, the scriptural portion, that Sabbath from Exodus 27-28. It's all about the creation of the menorah, the 7-branch candelabra in the Mishkan, in the desert sanctuary that the Israelites carried with them throughout their wanderings in the desert. And it also talks about the eternal light. You know, in every Jewish sanctuary there's what's called the Ner Tamid, the eternal flame. And all of that's mentioned in Exodus. So I'm telling these kids, from Exodus, you shall command the people of Israel. God is speaking to the Israelites in the desert. You shall command the people of Israel to take pure olive oil for a light, to cause it to burn eternally in the sanctuary. And these 5th graders are looking at me like I'm really weird. And then I went on from there to talk about the Torah scroll and some other things, the silver breastplate and so forth. The next week or so, I get a beautiful series of thank you notes from all these children. And one of the girls writes to me a thank you note, and she says, you know, I especially like your story about the internal light. And I thought that was brilliant, because that's really what we're here to speak about this morning. The internal light is the spark of the divinity within, as it's expressed in a plethora of ways in the Psalms. And to me, faith begins with that recognition, that understanding of the internal light that is embedded within us. It is the indwelling presence of the divine that affects all aspects of our life. So when I talk about faith, to tell you the truth, faith in the Jewish tradition is not necessarily it's not only about faith in God. It's, in fact, if you read the 5 books of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses pretty carefully, you'll notice there aren't any atheists. There aren't even any agnostics in the 5 books. There are people who have problems with God, people who wrestle with God, people who get angry with God, and express it in a multitude of ways, but there are no atheists. So I would offer you the thought that rather than what is faith, I would say what is the meaning of faithfulness. That's how I approach this whole question from the Jewish tradition. What does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to trust in the divine, in the community, in oneself, in one's relationship with one's fellow man and woman? By the way, I should have put this up in the front. What's the word for faith in Hebrew? The word is emunah, spelled E-M-U-N-A-H. And it comes from a Hebrew word. Almost all Hebrew words have the 3 consonantal roots. And the 3 root letters, the 3 consonants are the A, which to us sounds like a vowel, but it's actually a consonant, the M, and the N. That's where you get the word amen. Amen and emunah. To say amen and to say emunah, faith, are one and the same, because, by the way, the word amen comes from the Hebrew, which is El Melech Ne'eman. I recognize that God is sovereign. Or another way of saying it would be, I understand that God is transcendent. God is all around us. So that's, you can dazzle your friends with and explain that amen in English is really the Hebrew acrostic, meaning God is ultimately real. God is there all the time. So, as I said, I'm not so concerned about faith. I'm really concerned about faithfulness. What does it mean to be faithful? It means to deal with the social justice issues of our world. Let me give you a few examples of faithfulness in the Torah. Think of Abraham, the first patriarch. By the way, Abraham means the big daddy of nations in the Hebrew etymology. Abraham, among other, remember he has a covenant with God. He and his wife Sarah make this special covenant with the divine in chapter 17. And then in chapter 18, right after Sarah gets pregnant and she says, how could I possibly give birth? I'm an old woman, and my husband's even older. Soon after that, in the middle of chapter 18, Abraham looks around, and God says to Abraham, the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah are grievous. They are, they're horrible people. They're doing all kinds of terrible things, and they don't even understand what it means to repent. And Abraham, realizing that perhaps there are some decent people in Sodom and Gomorrah, says to God, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the evil? And so he begins bargaining, right? Remember, he says, if there are 50 righteous persons, souls in this community, are you going to destroy the city? And he keeps going and going and going till he comes down to 10, right? 10 nefashot, 10 souls, and he says, will you destroy these cities if there are still live 10 righteous souls in Sodom and Gomorrah? And we know the answer. In fact, those cities were destroyed. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I see Abraham's faithfulness, his belief in the divinity of each and every human being as an essential part of his relationship with the divine. Another example, Moses. We're studying about Moses right now because in the Torah portions for January, February into March, we're in the midst of the book of Exodus. Think about Moses and the burning bush. Remember that great story? Chapter 3. Why is the burning bush such a difficult question? Because it's not a difficult question, it's a challenging question. It is, in fact, the idea that the light, the eternal light that emanates, or the fire that emanates from the burning bush, is a way of showing Moses that God will always be there. Remember that being a prophet is not a particularly wonderful position to have. It's not a particularly wonderful profession to have. And Moses continually in the first 6 or 7 chapters of Exodus says, I don't really want to be a prophet. I don't speak very well. My lips are burnt. How can I give this message to the Pharaoh? How can I tell the Pharaoh, let my people go? Moses is reluctant, by the way. That's the motif, the leitmotif of all prophets in the Hebrew scriptures. They never really want to be the prophet, because it's a thankless position, it really is. But the faithfulness part of this story comes when Moses says, okay, I understand what you want me to do, God, but I'm going to go back to the people, and they're going to say, who is this God who's telling us such and such, that we will be delivered from the oppression of Egypt? And Moses says, what am I going to say to them? How shall I answer them? In other words, the people want some concrete, empirical proof that the divine is really going to do such and such. What does God say? By the way, God doesn't speak in the King Jamesian English. We don't know what language God's spoken, but in the Hebrew it says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. In the old translation is, I am that I am. Remember that famous phrase in chapter 3? It's not a good translation. Not that I don't like the King James Bible, but it's just not an accurate translation. It actually means, I will be whom I shall be. In other words, God is always there. There's infinite potential. God has been with us in the past. God is always with us in the present. God will be with us in the future. That's why the Hebrew is actually written in the future tense. I will be whom I shall be. In other words, I will be there for you in your present and your future, all the things that shall happen to you. That to me is an expression of faithfulness. One more, speaking of the people in the desert, this coming Sabbath we come to chapters 13, 14, 15 in Exodus, and you know that's the famous moment when the people jump into the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea. You remember, the Red Sea is 250 miles south. It was the Sea of Reeds near the cities of Goshen in the Fertile Crescent, the Nile River Delta area. Okay? Can you imagine 600,000 plus people getting ready to cross through the waters? Every time I read the story, I think this is unbelievable. It doesn't make any sense. Actually, there were many more, according to Torah, than 600,000. There were many Egyptians who wanted to leave with the Israelites. And the question is, who has the guts to step forward, to jump into the waters, even though supposedly it was like a mini ocean. It was like a lake. Well, Moses didn't do it. Aaron didn't do it. Miriam didn't do it. They were all standing there arguing, praying, beseeching the divine, please, please, what's going to happen? The charioteers are chasing after us. We've got to get going. We've got to get going. Well, there was one young man who decided to take a leap of faith. His name was Nachshon. He was related to the family of Aaron. He was kind of like a younger nephew. And Nachshon says, enough with the prayers. You're talking too much. Time for action. And he literally, according to the Midrash, this is the 2nd century commentary from the rabbinic sages, he jumps into the water, and at the moment he dives into the waters start to recede, they start to open up. And the people of Israel were able to cross through that shallow body of water and escape the Egyptian armies. That to me is faithfulness. It means that recognizing that God will be there even when we don't know exactly what's going to happen. This 19-year-old chutzpah teenager jumps in and leads the people into freedom. So I think faithfulness has to be tied in with the notion of trust. In Hebrew it's called bitachon. We know that the divine is there, even when things are not going so well in our lives. And we have to hold on to that trust, even in the nadir, in the lower moments of our existence, when things seem so problematic. Let me turn it around for just a minute, because I was looking at our own prayer book, trying to think, what is a classic expression of faith in the prayer book, in the Jewish prayer book? Well, one great expression you know probably by heart from Deuteronomy is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's Deuteronomy 6. But let me read this, let me share this prayer. It's actually not a prayer, it's a teaching from the Mishnah, from the 1st century, which to me I think embodies everything I'm trying to say about being faithful. And it goes like this. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruits of this world. And they are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early in the morning for study, both morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for their burial, being devoted in one's prayers, and making peace among all peoples. These are the things that bring us reward, but the study of Torah is equal to them all because it leads to them all. Which is a way of saying when we study Bible, when we study sacred scriptures, it channels our thinking, our intention, our devotion, our discipline towards doing what I consider faithful acts. Everything I'm trying to say is it's about action. We can have all the belief systems we want, but if we don't act upon what we want to really do, how can we make the ideal real? So I'll leave you with this story. It's about yearning and about wanting and trying to find the best. So I don't know if any of you have read the Tales of Martin Buber. You know, Buber was one of the great teachers of the 20th century, a German Jew who escaped from the Nazis and went to Jerusalem in 1935 and helped set up the Hebrew University in Palestine. So Buber was famous as a young man because he studied the Hasidic traditions in Eastern Europe. His great-great-grandparents were Hasidic Jews. His grandfather was an academic, a Wissenschaft, a Studentens professor, the scientific study of religion. But Buber was interested in the emotional, spiritual enthusiasm of the Hasidic Jews of Eastern Europe, of Poland and Russia. So he tells this story. It goes like this. In a small village in a shtetl, there's a man named Isaac, or Reb Yitzhak. In those days, everybody was called Reb. It's kind of like calling someone Mr. or Mrs. Doesn't mean he was a rabbi. It's just a title of affection and honor. Reb Yitzhak was a poor man, and his wife was kind of complaining and telling him he should work harder, they need more money, how could they support all their children and so forth. And he had a dream. And he dreamt that if he went to Krakow, there was a famous synagogue, a shul in Krakow, where there was an incredible treasure. And if he found the right place in the front of the sanctuary and dug underneath the floorboards, he would literally get that treasure, take it home, and sustain his family. So he tells his wife this dream, and she looks at him and says, "You're crazy. We have enough problems. You want to go to Krakow? Who's going to find anything in Krakow?" He says, "No, this is a dream. This is a portent." So he leaves his family. He travels. Who knows how he got there? Krakow is more than 100 miles away. He gets to Krakow. The synagogue is guarded by gendarmes. In those days, the Polish authorities had, so to speak, political control over all religious institutions. So there were policemen in front of the synagogue. And he comes up to the policeman and says, "I'd like to go into the sanctuary and pray." And the man says, "What in the world do you want to be here? What's your purpose? You were obviously a farmer from from a little village way far away. And he says, I had this dream, and I dreamt, and so forth, and so on. He tells the gendarme the whole dream. And the gendarme looks at him and says, you know, I had a dream not so long ago. And in my dream, I heard a heavenly voice which told me that in a little shtibelach, which means a little private chapel, in a town where Reb Yitzhak lived, was an amazing treasure. And I've been thinking for quite a while about trying to find that little village and go find a shtibelach and dig for the treasure. And Reb Yitzhak looks at the gendarme and says, what? I'm from that town. That's where I come from. That's where my family is. And the gendarme says, you have no business being in Krakow. Go home, dig up under your floorboards. You will find your treasure right there. It is within you. It is with you. And God has provided it for you. And so according to the tales, Rabbi Yitzhak traveled all the way back on the wagon, dug into the floor, underneath the floor, and found his own treasure within his own household. And thus was sustained. So it's very simple. Faithfulness comes from within, it comes from beyond, and it comes from a sense of trust and a sense of assurance. But that means you and I have to really do something. We can't just sit around and pray. We have to make this world better. Thank you.
I invite you to go within a place where we know we're fully aware we're connected. We're in the consciousness, the Christ consciousness, the awareness of God within and God without. We are a spiritual family and come together in shared prayer to be present in our faith. Faith is the conviction of things not seen. It is said that faith is an integral part of courage. Faith is courage to trust beyond measure in all matters. Unity's foundation is built on prayer and meditation. Faith and trust in God is expressed through our statement of faith. We welcome furthering our knowledge and awareness of the many religions of the world. We today are especially grateful for Rabbi Levy speaking about faith in the Jewish tradition, or faithfulness. We celebrate the richness of diverse beliefs and expressions that honor the sacred truth of the divine. From Unity's Statement of Peace, we stand for peace in the presence of conflict, for love in the presence of hatred, and for forgiveness in the presence of injury. Unity honors the many names of God, the many paths of God, the many ways to worship God. For there is only one power and presence of God, and that God loves each and one of us equally. I invite you to take into this silence, praying from your heart, a picture of the faith traditions of the world, represented equally, standing together in faith and unity, and as a part of our spiritual family. in this practice of prayer, in this practice of peace, we realize, we know, we feel, we express our oneness. And so it is. It is so. Amen.